Hey, what is up guys, Mastiff here, back to do another video, and today I've got a very special themed video around Shatterer tanks, as you may have guessed by the title and the thumbnail. So this first game will be on Tournament Odyssey, and it's a mysterious player, but I can assure you guys it is a good player in this one. I also have some games versus Senna as well to demonstrate this unit in its fullest potential. And no, there's no better faction to do it with as ZOCOM, because they do get the overload beam on their Shatterer tank, which provides an extra powerful attack for the Shatterer tank, but it does disable the unit for a few seconds. But it's worth it in some situations, say if you need to kill off an enemy unit before it kills you, then that's when you use overload beam. You will see that in a game in this video here. But so far, so good. The game is turning out to be pretty standard thus far. Of course, it is the early scouting phase. Both of us taking our respective Tiberium spikes. It's good to make 3 or 4 scouts as GDI. Don't invest more unless you know your opponent is like Scrin. Maybe 4 or 5 squads against Scrin's a good idea, for the simple fact that they can Descent rush you. But that's going to be less common now in R20, because Riflemen and all infantry take less damage from the disintegrator attack, so about 10% less. So not a big deal, but still, it is noted. It is a noticeable difference. That was not an actual rig, that's my subscriber notification, but I didn't have the overlay show there. Don't worry guys, I'm not hacking, there's no cheating going on here. Even though I like rigs, I don't get them out on 2 refineries at this stage. I need a tier 2 obviously to build 1. If I was rig rushing, I would do it here on 4 harvesters. I'd usually make a Pred and an APC. But this game I'm opting to go for an expansion. You know, all the builds that I do keep my opponents guessing, because sometimes I do early game low eco strats, and other games I just macro up. I want to make myself as unpredictable as possible. I notice players scout me at all costs. There's some players like Senna that you don't really have to scout, but I notice that everyone usually goes for vehicle scouts against me, because I just have so many different strategies that I can do. And this one that I'm about to execute is a strategy that I have not done very often, but I feel has much potential. My opponent going for that defensive tower, which is a pretty big problem, because if I'm ultimately going for Shatterer tanks, he's just going to one-shot them with that tower. Or I think it's one-shot, I could be mistaken. I know a lot of stats in this game, but I don't know every single stat off by heart. Shatterer tanks have a lot of health, but their armor is not particularly great. Armor values were tweaked a little bit throughout the history of 1.02 plus. In R19, Shatterer tanks got a 10 or 15% increase to their rocket damage resistance, so that'll make them a little bit better against missile squads, rocket squads, and things like bikes. But obviously those units aren't meant to counter bikes, but still, it's nice having a bit more resistance for killing the unit that it's designed to counter. Usually Shadow tanks are just there to keep your opponent's spam numbers in check. They don't provide much armor, but they deal significant damage. It's basically a portable sonic emitter with way less hit points, but it's mobile. I can't take that defensive tower unfortunately, because he grabbed it. Though my only option to deal with that tower would be to spam a ton of missiles with the Tiberium field suits. I do get the evac on that engineer there. I'm intending to take the EMP control center, something that you rarely see. I see that my opponent is going to bypass my army and instead go for my main base, but good thing is I have the airborne support power, which is actually going to come in great use here. That Shadow tank gets a nice shot off there. I use the overload beam, and with that I'm able to thin out those Pipple numbers a little bit, though not enough. Those Pipples and that Titan just wrecking my harvest line. All my harvest is being destroyed, but there is a counter attack happening for me. There's 2 Shadow tanks and infantry, and a couple of APCs. Let's see where that goes. Meanwhile, I'm losing tons of harvesters. 3 or 4 harvesters falling from me, so this counterattack has to be successful. I need to do a ton of damage with this. Micro is key. Shadow tanks, I feel you can get way more mileage out of them if you can control them well. So I'm engaging these Titans. I used the overload beam. It wasn't enough to take out that Titan, but it did damage it significantly. I want to use the overload beam before my Shatterers die as well, just so I can extract as much from them as possible. That attack will be halted. No AP ammo just yet, but that will be online for him in a moment. I've got 1 or 2 Shadow tanks and a bunch of infantry. These Shadow tanks are going to be excellent in dealing with Wolverines. Since my opponent is still Talons, then Wolverines is one of his only means of countering this play I'm doing. Shadow tanks pretty much one-shot them. Zone Shatterers are very effective as well. My opponent doesn't have sonic emitters, so his only bet here would be to go for Wolverines and Watchtowers pretty much. And those Shadow tanks with their overload beam able to take out those Titans in quick succession. Watchtowers also being focused down as soon as they're being dropped. And this is pretty much my army. I need to make this work. Watchtowers thinning out my infantry. Pitbulls on the attack as well. Mortars upgraded. Mortars no longer damage friendly pitbulls, so that's a nice buff for the pitbull. Before, the mortars would kill the unit itself, and that was bad. But I'm preparing a defense line against these pitbulls with watchtowers and infantry. Watchtowers not ideal, infantry not ideal against those mortars, but it's just going to give me time to inflict as much damage here on this MCV as possible. And I'm stopping to focus down these reinforcements just so my opponent can't get out as much forces as he would like. If I keep the numbers low, then I can inflict more and more damage with these Shadow tanks, which have been killing so much. That Shatterer tank there must have got off its 3rd or 4th overload beam, so those Zone Shatterers definitely paying off in this engagement. And just because I've penetrated so far into his base and he's filing in Titans 1v1, I'm able to take out this base, and really he can't do anything about this. If he decides to wait until he has 2 or 3 Titans, that's not ideal for him either, because I'm just going to take out the MCV. MCV falls, Watchtowers will also follow. Shadow tanks amazing against structures. That's why I don't understand about CGIP when he says in 1.03 Shadow tanks are great versus structures. Well, they are in every other patch. Newsflash. Shadow tanks are good versus structures in every patch. You don't have to play 1.03 to have an effective anti-structure unit. The Shadow tank does that quite nicely. But it also kills vehicles, it kills infantry. It's a great unit, very low health unit though. It's great when supported properly. And I do manage to retreat with these 2, which are on the very low health. War Factory coming down for me. And I know pretty much at this point that these Shadow tanks and infantry can't be contested by armor. So what's going to be the likely follow-up? Well, it's probably going to be APCs. Likely going to be hammerheads. I just glanced over to my Discord. I got a PM just there. But yeah, APCs to counter those hammerheads, which will likely follow suit. So I'm building up this force in strength. There's tons of units there, 15 rocket squads, a bunch of Shadow tanks and APCs, all those Shadow tanks promoting to that veteran status. I wasn't able to grab the EMP control center in the middle, but that's not going to matter. There's 2 harvesters there that are idle, and I think I can secure this win by taking this fight in the south. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, a very powerful combination. Shadow tanks and infantry against steel Talons. I'd argue it's the best thing you can do. You have to play around with Shatterers though and APCs depending if your opponent's going for Wolverines or Hammerheads. If you see he's going airfields, just build APCs instead of Shatterer tanks. And you've got to have the right ratio of units. That's the key when it comes to ZOCOM and GDI Tier 1, Tier 2 unit compositions. And this force will be taken out. Hammerhead's also not a threat because I anticipated they would come. I built the counter. Rocket squads and APCs will deal with Hammerheads quite nicely. So those fall. And really the key to winning is to anticipate your opponent's next move. You've got to look at your army and just ask yourself, what would you do in that situation? There's 2 Shadow tanks, a bunch of infantry. What would you do if you saw that in your opponent's view? Well, you would probably go for Hammerheads, and that's exactly what happened there. So that is going to be GG. So we can go to the next game of this demonstration or video of Shadow tanks so we can see what they are good at and how you can use them. Alright guys, and this is the second game involving Shadow tanks. I'm going to be playing none other than the ZOCOM faction, because there is just no better faction to do Shatterer based strategies with other than ZOCOM. And we are playing on the beautiful new map called Toxicity, a great map addition by Desolator Trooper, who has been working tremendously hard on these new maps for us to play. So I appreciate the huge contribution that he has made with these maps. His aesthetic style is amazing, and we are fortunate to have yet again another very good map maker. I feared once Technique left we would never have the same caliber of maps made again, but I was wrong. Someone else showing up to the scene, and yeah, we have maps like this now to watch, to play and enjoy. This is a great map, so a quick tour of this map. There's an EMP control center in the bottom of the map, and in the middle there's a defensive tower as well as a blue Tiberium field. There's 2 spikes per players, and this map reminds me a lot of Tournament Decision when it comes to texture terrain. Anyways, I'm versus Senna in this particular match. Senna is going to be playing as the Black Hand. So not a matchup that ZOCOM is particularly favored in. And this is a new map, so you can expect to see new strategies pop up. That's the norm, and this is R20 as well. So a new patch and new map. You can expect to see gameplay that is quite different to what people are used to. Queuing harvesters, which is the norm. 5 and 2 on the main Tiberium field. You don't want to make more than that, otherwise you'll get harvesters queuing up at the refineries and you won't be efficiently mining and harvesting Tiberium because of it. You want to have 2 to 3 harvesters at most per refinery, and having 5 and 2 on one field of that size is the optimal ratio. If you build any less, then you're going to get out ecoed by your opponent. If you build any more, then you're likely going to be experiencing bugged harvesters that are just sitting idle waiting to dock in the ref. That still can happen with 5 harvesters and 2 ref, but the 5th harvester is a more ideal ratio we've found over the years. And what happens here is players just eco up to 9 harvesters or 10 harvesters, 4 refineries. That's usually how it goes, with maybe something after the 3rd refinery, like an airfield that I'm doing here. I'm going for a tier 2 because I'm versus Black Hand. I want to have something out on the map because of the flame tanks. Purifying Flame is still brutal, even though it was nerfed with the flame tanks. But, you know, having said that, the Redeemer gets the blue flame now, which is something that I've yet to see in an actual match do anything. But, yeah, that was a safe thing to do when it came to the patch, because Redeemer is very large, very expensive. You can't exactly use it like a flame tank, let's be honest. It's too expensive to throw away. Flame tanks at $1,200, sure, you can just send them in. They're going to probably kill off a refinery, which gets you the value of that flame tank. Whereas a Redeemer, your opponent's just going to EMP it, and you're going to lose that Redeemer, which is a huge loss. Not to mention that most players like to sell off their Redeemer engineering facilities, which makes the cost of rebuilding it even more. But yeah, Senna in this match, you can see he's doing a base push on toxicity. That rifle garrison not being taken out on the right hand side. And I'm going for Shatterer tanks. I'm going for the zone Shatterers. I'm going to build a bunch of those up. And I see the Conyards, so my natural instinct here was to go for some EMP Grenadiers as well as Shatterer tanks. EMP plus Shatterers versus Black Hand. That's a great number of Shatterer tanks. I don't think people are used to seeing Shatterer spam. But Senna is well aware of what is coming. He does use the radar jamming missile. Pretty suitably timed as well, because he was able to get that MCV into my Tiberium field. I do launch the overload beam, and I'm able to get some damage dealt on that Obelisk of Light. Here comes the Catalyst missile as well, probably on my expansion refinery. I used that, and Senna, I think he sold off his chemical plant. He summoned in the Sea Tiberium, used the Catalyst missile, and probably sold it off for resources for this push. So that's very lucky from me. And I was criticizing the map at this point because I was thinking, yeah, there's no way for me to maneuver off this field to engage this MCV because it's just awkward here. So I'm going to be forced to leave this position soon because I was a bit paranoid about this click situation. So at this point I was like, yep, I'm just going to cut my losses and retreat off of this Tiberium field. He can defend there with Obelisk for days. Tier 3 Obelisk spam versus Shatterer tanks, not a great situation to be in as ZOCOM. But still, I'm going to roll with this strategy. Harvester going down. That Rifleman with AP ammo killing Harvester Center. Too preoccupied on that push to notice. So I'm going to go in here with these Shatterer tanks and see what I can accomplish. And since he has to contend with my Shatterer tanks, it's likely that he will be spamming Obelisk, which means I'm probably free to build a bunch of Hammerheads, because you can only queue one defense at a time. I mean, he's not going to go for Obelisk and SAM sites at the same time, because it would not be enough to sufficiently counter both threats. So that's the point of combined arms. Your opponent, when he has MCVs, is unlikely to be able to counter both threats simultaneously with the same efficacy. So I've got 7 Shatterer tanks, 3 Pred tanks, and my follow-up is a bunch of Hammerheads. I'm going to move to Senna's base here with these Shat, and that's a lot of base destroying power. I see the Obelisk there. That's quite an issue, but I'm going to do a micro trick, which is what I wanted to demonstrate this game for. So what I did was I sent my Rifleman forward here just to bait the shot from the Obelisk of Light, just so I wouldn't expend any of my Shatterer tanks in this fight. And to dispose of this Obelisk quickly, I used the Overload Beam, and as a result I only lose a single Shatterer tank against 2 Obelisks. With no micro, with no tricks there, I probably would have lost 3 or 4 Shatterer tanks and that push would have been halted. But because I did that micro, those Shatterer tanks all live, besides one that did get destroyed, but that was an excellent trade. 2 Obelisks of Light for a singular Shatterer tank. That Overload Beam pretty much winning me that fight, and I'm able to puncture through the defense of Senna and take out this Redeemer engineering facility. I'm using the Overload Beam as well on these Shatterer tanks, making short work of these Obelisks. Great ability to use against Obelisks of Light. And now these SAM sites are being deployed, but the Shatterer tanks are just going to be able to focus those turrets down as well. The Shatterer tanks are here, the Hammerheads as well can't be countered. The Shatterers are just going to destroy all the turrets that get deployed by Senna. And I'm trying to focus these down as quick as possible. No tip core online for Senna. But yeah, these Shatterer tanks are so problematic. And my MCV meanwhile has expanded to my 3rd Tiberium field. An upgrade that NOD players cannot forego is the quad turret. Senna did not purchase it that game. But yeah, that was a great demonstration as well for Shatterer tanks and how you can use them to even penetrate a NOD base. But it does require micro. Shatterer tanks are a unit that do require a lot of control and finesse, and that game was no exception. So let's go on to the 3rd and final game and see what that one is all about. Okay guys, this is going to be the third and final game of this Shatterer tank demonstrational video. Now we're back onto Tournament Odyssey. I know it's a really played map, but this game here is a great demonstration of the unit once more. I did use a different build order, but I don't feel like it's a problem demonstrating this unit on the same map. So this is going to be against Senna this time. These are good players I'm playing against. And the success rate with this strategy has been very good so far. We've known it to be good for many years. Shatterer Imp against Steel Talons, but this time Senna is going to be playing as the GDI faction. Once again, I'm going to be playing as the ZOCOM faction here, which means I do get access to that ability of the overload beam. I just did a quick wiki search for the Zone Shatterer, and apparently it states that the overload beam was used in red zones to destroy larger Tiberium crystals, and that the unit is not actually supposed to be used in combat situations. Very interesting lore-wise. Nonetheless, it's a great unit to be using in your games in the right spot, in the right situation. The key is using it when it is best used. Of course, the later the game goes, the less utility they'll have. That's how trying to get them out as soon as possible is the way to go. So this is a wild rush I'm doing here. I consider it a rush. Rush is no longer working. Kane's are from 1 ref, but you may as well call this a rush now, where I'm going to do a one-base strategy. I'm going for 4 harvesters, just as I mentioned in the first game. You want to be building units after your 4th harvester. This is when timing pushes most work. So I just about got my 4th half out now, and I'm going to go for a rig. Now this is looking like a rig rush. There's a lot of mind games here. Look how many units I have unlocked due to this tier 2 that I built. I don't have to build a rig here. And this was beaconed as well. So Senna knows exactly what's coming. But I'm actually just going to go infantry instead. So Senna's going to predict there's a rig coming, when in fact I'm going to transition into infantry spam. So I'm building some rockets here, hoping to intercept this pitbull just so the Senna can't reveal the transitions I'm going for. I'm going to go for an armory now as well. And this is going to be a very interesting game. I put an engineer in this APC, maybe to take his Tiberium spike, maybe to take the EMP control center in the middle, or the defensive tower next to his base. There's a lot of options. APC engineers are a great thing to do on this map. I summon in the ZOCOM Airborne, which gives me access to 2 veteran riflemen and veteran missile squads. And instead of a rig, I'm going for Zone Shatterers. So it's going to be an infantry Shatterer play, and Senna assumes there's a rig coming, when in fact that is not the case. Pred tanks were built because he anticipates a rig. He can't be building anti-infantry units against this strategy I'm doing. So Senna read this wrong. I did something that he did not expect. There's a lot of different things you can do on one base as ZOCOM or GDI. You can go for hammerheads, you can go for ZOCOM augers, you can go for rigs, you can go infantry like I'm doing here, which is a very potent strategy because you can do this as well, which is to dig foxholes and just garrison up those rockets in the foxholes. I'd advise putting your veteran ones in there just so they rank up quicker. And this is going to provide the Shatterer tanks the ability to use their range advantage, and then when your opponent pushes, you just reverse into those defended foxholes. That APC engineer was successful. I took over the refinery, and now these Shatterer tanks are going to be my tool to destroy the watchtower spam. So these watchtowers are what Senna is relying on to clean up my infantry mass, but the infantry is just going to stay back there. I don't really need to push in with the infantry. They're just there to stop him from chasing my Shatterers, because Shatterers have more range than Prez and APCs. I can just make a death trap here with my Shatterer tanks and infantry and just kite these Preds and APCs for days. overload beam not quite used yet, but I have 4 shadow tanks in the front line, 5 now rocking up. That's a significant amount of damage. Senna using the Orca Strike, but those foxholes are going to provide me with some decent anti-infantry. I can go for slingshots, which is the GDI's other hover tank unit in this expansion. I use the overload beam on these shadow tanks just to deal with these pred tanks so I don't lose any units, and now these APCs will be going down as well. That shadow tank was about to fall, but the overload beam spares its life. Hammerhead's coming out here, and I can do what I just mentioned, which is to just reverse to my foxholes, and those shadow tanks are just wrecking everything that he builds. And this is of course a micro-intensive thing. You know, you're going to get way more mileage out of shadow tanks if you can micro them correctly, if you can utilize them correctly. A lot of players don't know how to use shadow tanks, and that's how they're perceived to be a weak unit, but they can be great in situations like this. Now, in seeing those hammerheads, I summoned in the Bloodhounds, which is a $3,000 support power for ZOCOM and GDI. Gives me 2 APCs and 2 Pitbulls. Those APCs also upgraded with the AP ammo. Watchtowers being built there as well, but I have now 5 ZOCOM Orcas. I built those primarily to deal with Juggernauts and Sonic Emitters because I'm anticipating that to be a thing now. If a Sonic Emitter does get dropped, I can just waste it immediately with these ZOCOM Orcas. But the disadvantage of ZDI going for tier 3 is that they will be undefended pretty much until they have their tier 3 online. And as you saw in that previous game, shadow tanks are no slouch. You can dispose of Sonic Emitters and Obelisks with the normal attack and then following it up with the overload beam. ZOCOM Orcas sweep in, they destroy a bunch of units, and the shadow tanks just have not been able to... Senna just can't counter them. Shadow tanks are just wrecking everything here, and the rig, which is very late, will be good to heal up these shadow tanks. Overload beam once more coming down on those Shatterers. And I feel that this is how you're supposed to use the Shatterer tank. Before your opponent gets tier 3 out, it has to be in the mid game. I expanded with a Surveyor. That's better to do in R19/R20. They deploy way quicker in this patch. Shatterers just have not been countered. Yes, Senna just cannot kill any Shatterer tanks. Those were doing so much damage. They're promoting all the way to elite, I believe. That is going to be that. So I hope you all enjoyed that video, guys, demonstrating Shatterers and how to use them. You should have a better idea of when and where to use Shatterers. They're excellent against GDI factions. They're okay against Skrins as well. The factions that have the slowest units, Shatterer tanks deal with nicely. They also deal with Wolverines, as you saw in that first game. It gives Steel Talons limited options to counter that push. But then even GDI, they struggled as well. So that is that. So I hope you all enjoyed that, guys. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I want to thank all my Patreon supporters for continuing to support me, my channel, and the work that I do behind the scenes with the 4K mod and R20 patch. So this is me, Master Leaf. Peace out.